Erev Tov, good evening, and welcome to the launching of our 2023-2024 Jewish Book Council Author Series. And I'm trying to get on my screen, someone has popped up, but I'm not sure if that's on everyone's. I was soon going to hear from Lisa Scottoline on her best-selling book, Loyalty, but until then, a little bit of advertising on what is coming up at Under One Tent. Under One Tent, a signature program of the JCC, partners quite a bit, almost always, in fact, with other organizations and synagogues around the East Bay, and in particular, Contra Costa and Pleasanton. Today's talk is sponsored by the JCC and Congregation B'nai Shalom in partnership with Diablo Valley Hadassah. And of course, our major partner is the Jewish Book Council, which provides our authors to us from today's launch through the early spring. And I want to note, before I give a little bit more of marketing details about our upcoming events, that our authors speak with the generosity of their hearts and spirits without an honorarium. So to thank them, think about purchasing their book or books. Our present author has many of them, I think 35 novels, and either for yourself or for your organizational library or for a friend. Think about Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and other holidays coming up just in a few months. Speaking of coming up next week, Fred Rosenbaum returns with Around the World with Fred, one of our glorious best speakers, and for the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival, in partnership with the Contra Costa JCC, B'nai Shalom, and Diablo Valley Hadassah, he presents a deep dive into movies. Next week, on Thursday at 7 p.m., he's diving into the history of the society seen in the Oscar-winning Driving Miss Daisy. So we invite you to go to eastbayjewishfilm.org and register for that program. In the morning, for those who are tired of making the same brisket or honey chicken, you can learn about Mizrahi, some would say Sephardic cuisine, just for the high holidays, in particular Rosh Hashanah, with a special Israeli chef, Ayelet. And that is at 11 o'clock in the morning on Thursday as well. The next book talk, however, is going to be on September 12th, just before the high holidays begin, with an Israeli author talking about the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So we invite you to go to underonetent.org to find out everything that is cooking and readable and exciting in our community. And now, two things. Again, think about purchasing Lisa's book. And also, if you have questions for her, and I hope you will, please use the chat function at the bottom of your computer screen and type in your questions for her. Now, her official biography. Lisa Scottoline is a #1 best-selling author and has been on many best-selling lists, from the New York Times to USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, Publishers Weekly, the Washington Post, and the LA Times. As I said before, she's the author of 35 novels, including her newest book, Loyalty. When she, in one of her series, Janet Maslin of the New York Times wrote that she applauds Lisa's books as, quote, punchy, wisecracking thrillers whose characters are earthy, fun, and self-deprecating, so unquote. She is the recipient of many writing awards, including the Edgar Award, the Mystery Writers of America's most prestigious honor, and several others, and also got great 2 thumbs up for an audio, I guess it's an audio book of one of her nonfiction books, and maybe she can explain the title later. Why My Third Husband is a Dog. In any event, we welcome Lisa take it away.
Reva, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for being here. This is so exciting to be out the kickoff, and thanks to the Jewish Book Council. This is my second year appearing, and I'm just so honored and so happy that you guys had me. So thank you. What I would like to do is sort of keep this lively and interesting and chat a little bit about what's behind the books that are relevant to you guys, and also open up to questions about anything. I love to talk, and I'm here for you. And anything you want to know about, I'm happy to discuss. I kind of wanted to start because I think Reva thank you for that wonderful introduction. I was a thriller. Well, to begin with, I was a lawyer, if you can imagine that, and loved it, and was an adjunct law professor as well, and always sort of, but turned to writing, frankly, because in the 1990s, I wanted to see more women main characters. I mean, I think John Grisham, who's terrific, was writing a lot of male leads, and I was like, why are there no women? So I sort of had a little Nancy Drew in me, and it had to come out. So I wrote about 35 thrillers and became president of Mystery Writers of America. And I love books that move fast. But what happened as I got older and was relevant for our purposes is that I started to remember a course I took because I was lucky enough to take a course with Philip Roth, the late Philip Roth, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a Philadelphian, you can tell by my delicious accent. And so I was admitted to this seminar where he introduced us to all of these authors. Some of it was literature of the Holocaust, but otherwise he just wanted us to read authors who we would not normally encounter in your basic English major course. And it was like being taking physics with Einstein, okay? Because the class was once a week. It was a seminar, there were only 15 kids in it. And he would assign the book, and then he would sit and talk about the book for 2 hours without notes. And he would first go big picture, explain the book. Why did this author write it around this time? Set it in a political and a social and a historical context. And then narrow his focus. So talk about why this subject, why now? Why this chapter here? Why this paragraph? Why this verb? And it was really amazing to sort of have him deconstruct these books. One such was a book that I had not read, and it was called Survival in Auschwitz by the great Primo Levi. Now, you undoubtedly know that book, especially if you're versed in Holocaust fiction. And we read a lot of Holocaust fiction, but I had never read that book. And I thought, in a way, what Mr. Roth said to us, we called him Mr. Roth, what he said to us about that memoir in particular was that it could only have been written by Primo Levi. And by that, he meant that I'll just briefly tell you about the book. Primo Levi was an Italian Jewish chemist. He was arrested and sent to Auschwitz, but he survived, thank God. And so if you read this incredible, harrowing memoir, you may have, but it is written from his very unique Italian perspective. For example, he describes Auschwitz and a conversation with a guard at Auschwitz, and he compares it to Dante's Inferno. It is a comparison that is second nature to an Italian, and it suffuses that memoir. And I never forgot it. And a long story short, I'm getting older and older. I graduated law school 40 years ago, college, God knows when. And I thought, I had not really known about Italian Jews. Now, I have a very strong identification with being Italian American. I love Italian history and I love American history. I don't have a religious affiliation. We were raised without one. I think we worship carbohydrates in my family. That's just me telling you. But I just thought, why didn't I know about that? And the more I started to read about what happened to the Jews of Italy during the Holocaust, I kept thinking all these years, and we're talking about almost 45 years, why is no one writing about this? Because what was interesting to me, particularly, well, everything about it is fascinating, but that it was so unknown, kind of untold outside of the scholarship, outside of the Jewish community. And also that when you recognize that the Jewish community in Rome is the oldest continuously existing Jewish community in Western civilization. And what I thought was harrowing about it was that for me, it started to answer a question that I've had, because I just said that I was very proud of my Italian identity, but I am not proud that Italy turned fascist. It's shameful. And I wanted to understand why it happened. And you know that saying, they say, well, Mussolini made the trains run on time. And I'm just here to tell you that's completely wrong. If you've ever been to Italy, you know nothing runs on time. They don't care about time. Like I said, they care about carbohydrates. So I said to myself, well, I'm sort of have a great respect for the source material. I'm going to try to learn why Mussolini was so persuasive. And I read all of his speeches. And it was very clear to me that he was pitching, and his was the first fascist party, understand. So that he was pitching an ultranationalism. You are very special because you're Roman. And in fact, it wasn't a bad argument, considering that it almost captured they overtook so much of the world. And well, he did things like, for 5 years, change the plan of Rome so that Romans would ride by all of these things they had created. If you have been to Rome, and probably many of you have, you've probably noticed, as I did, the Colosseum is like there's a sidewalk between the street and the Colosseum. Like, my house has better setback. Well, you go, why is that? He caused that to happen. And that led me to write my first work of historical fiction. I changed careers completely. I said, you've written thrillers before, but you always write books about justice. And that's partly because I love the law and I love the theme of justice and right and wrong and what's ethical and what's unethical and what's immoral and what's moral, and how that complex bolus of questions presents itself so in such stark relief in the Holocaust in Italy. This is an example of Eternal. It's the story, fictionalized, 3 young people coming of age in Mussolini's Italy, right? There's a young, plucky young girl. Oh, guess who she's like? And she has 2 friends who she's they're both boys, and they're all 3, this trio is a friend, they're both guys, and she kind of has a crush on them both. One is Marco, sexy, handsome, robust, the most popular kid in class. The other one is Sandro, who's Marco's best friend. Sandro is an Italian Jew. He lives in the Jewish ghetto right across the street from Tiber Island, where Marco lives. And these 3 kids, and he's a brilliant guy, and he's thoughtful, and they all kind of really love each other as friends. And they start to develop this romantic crush on each other. And at the same time, so the problem of these 3 people and how they sort out their lives develops under Mussolini's fascism, because Marco starts to feel very inferior to everyone in his class. He has dyslexia. It's undiagnosed at that time. It was called word blindness in 1930s Rome. He starts to feel really dumb. I did research with the Dyslexia Foundation. I talked to kids who had dyslexia. One told me, I feel dumb and I don't even know why. And I said, that's Marco. You could almost see how if you start to feel inferior and you have self-esteem problems, and Mussolini comes along and says, you're amazing just because you're Roman. And Marco starts to turn fascist, move up in the fascist party at the same time, because this is the other theme that's really important in Eternal, that the fascist party, before we even get to the Nazis, enact a series of blatantly anti-Semitic laws that take property from the Jews, that kick Jewish professors out of their jobs, Jewish kids out of school. The whole death by 1,000 cuts to the Jewish community of Rome is perpetrated under color of law. That makes a very horrifying situation, because we like to think, those of us who are old enough to remember Perry Mason, that's me, we have this, our paradigm is that law leads to justice. But sometimes we know law doesn't lead to justice. But what is really interesting and horrifying is when law enacts injustice. And that's what happened in Holocaust in Italy. And that's what's told in Eternal. And thank God it was really very, very well received, because it was very important to me, not only because it was my first foray into historical fiction, but because there were real, obviously, Jews who were, I hate to use the term rounded up, that's what term that they use, but when the fascists enacted these laws and then the Nazis invaded and occupied Rome, they arrested the Jews, and partly they were able to arrest all the Jews because the fascists had required the Jewish community to turn over its addresses. So these two autocratic parties colluded to the horror and the demise of the Jewish community. And I wanted to tell that story, and I had to do it justice. I went over there, I did all the research. I've probably been researching this for 30 years, and ended up going and visiting for the 6th time during a memorial to those Jews who were killed, first identified by the fascists, persecuted by the fascists, and then ultimately murdered by the Nazis. So that is the backdrop of Eternal. Now, that said, I found myself wanting to answer more questions, and maybe this has happened to you as you got older, about your own heritage. I know my dad started doing our lineage, and I started to think, my first question in Eternal was, why did Italians follow fascism? And the second thing that I am not completely, that I'm ashamed of, is that that the mafia began in Sicily. And that brings me to loyalty, because that's the question I wanted to answer. The great thing about my job is I get to go, what interests you? And you hope that it interests other people too. And basically, I wanted to understand that, because as a person who's very interested, I think all of us are interested in the question of justice, no more so than the Jewish community, because justice and the notion of justice is so fundamental to the religion and the culture. So I thought this is fascinating, because when you start to understand the origin of the mafia, which is set forth in a fictional form, right? There's a guy who's the star of loyalty. And the saying, the villain is the hero of his own story. He actually is a guy who lives in the 1800s in Sicily and can't work his way up because all the land is owned by nobility, and it's a feudal time. You can't buy a house, you can't buy land, you can't move up. It's a blood right. So he starts to understand, oh, maybe I can protect the lemons. And then the first protection racket is born. That is exactly how the mafia started. At the same time, when I went there to do the research, I discovered that there was a secret organization of actually aristocrats, because Palermo, the capital of Sicily, was so corrupt. It's a lawless environment. So this is really interesting to see what happens in lawlessness, right? So there's a lawless environment. The police don't enforce any law. And Sicily has been colonized so many times. And every time the colonizer comes in and makes new law that benefits, guess what? The colonizer and the nobility. And there actually was a group of professionals who were nobles, but also said, this is terrible and wrong. It was unjust, even though it was legal. You see the theme? They would meet and they would try to solve murders and kidnappings, which were very rife at that time. And that's how loyalty begins, with the kidnapping that the police are sleeping on, but that this secret group of do-gooders called the Blessed Society of St. Paul is going to fix and set right. Now, what happened is, unlike Eternal, where all the 3 kids live within blocks of each other, very typical city dweller. I grew up in South Philly, right? That's how the cities are. In Sicily, there wasn't like that. Sicily's big if you've been, and it's very different terrain. There's fishing villages. I said, I want to have a character for a fishing village. What is that like? But again, of interest to the Jewish community, what I started to learn was, if you went back in Sicily's history, and if you can find this article yourself, because it was really what sparked my interest, was that there's an article in the New York Times, and it's about 3 years ago, and it said that there are almost no Jews in Sicily. I'm going to repeat that. There are almost no Jews in Sicily. Why? Because in 1492, in the 1490s, the Spanish Inquisition took place in Spain, and it was enforced in Sicily. There were 40,000 Jews on the island of Sicily at that time. Everybody was well assimilated. They prospered, even under different colonial rule. There was, until the Spanish Inquisition came in and said you can only have one religion, it's Catholicism. Muslims were expelled, Jews were expelled on pain of death. Anyone who left was tortured. Sometimes, it was just an awful, lethal persecution under color of law, which had the horrifying effect of still today, in modern times, from the 1400s, having almost no Jews on the island of Sicily. And I said, I want to illustrate that. right? I'm not writing a history textbook. I'm dramatizing the life of four characters: the first mafia family, a young lawyer who's going to try to set things right, a young woman who's from a fishing village, and for our purposes, a man named Alfredo, probably my favorite character, because I live alone and he lives alone with 3 goats and I live alone with 3 dogs. But sadly, he is Jewish and afraid he cannot practice his religion in public. Because what happened after the Spanish Inquisition expelled all the Jews from the island is that those who stayed behind, obviously because they didn't want to leave their homes that they've lived in, that their families had lived in for generations, practiced Judaism as best they could in secret. They were called conversos or moranos. These are derogatory terms in Spanish. And I wanted to illustrate that because part of me wants to try to explain to people how horrifying this discrimination is and how its effects are so awful. So that happens throughout Eternal, and that happens throughout Loyalty, that you see these 4 characters who are all different parts of Sicily. And there's going to be a kid that's kidnapped. And actually, he's sent to a mental asylum, which is actually true, because my historical fiction is combining reality. And you can see the difference in the back. Like it will say, this part's true, this part's not. Sicily improbably, considering how backward it was, it had the highest rates of poverty and illiteracy, ended up being a font at the head of the revolution for treating mental illness. Because the kidnapped kid, as was done at this time, was thrown into something called a lunatic asylum, the Royal Madhouse of Palermo, where he's kept forever. That place really existed. I visited it on my research trip. By the way, you can see on my website, which is scottoline.com, I've taken 40 videos. They're short, they're really entertaining. You can see Sicily. There's an interactive map for both Eternal and for Loyalty, where if you're interested, where does this scene take place? You can look it up. For example, in Eternal, I went to the transit camp in Carpi in Italy, which was where Primo Levi was sent and on his way to Auschwitz, and where the Jews of Rome were sent on their way to Auschwitz. I set a scene in it. The day I visited it, no one ever visits it. It's only open 1 day a week on a Sunday. The Italian government is not interested in you knowing this, but I am. So you can see these things, not only the story in the book, but see them on the website. It makes a nice companion to the book, or even if you don't read the book, you can learn about it. But Loyalty is about, again, I hope these books are uplifting in the end. And I think in a way taken together, they sort of have a similar message, which is how does the individual overcome the weight of a government that is oppressive, that is discriminatory, that will exile them and kill. You even see that in Eternal as well. And at the end of it, this is the kind of thought I want to leave you with before we open it up to questions. When I finished Eternal and when I finished Loyalty, these characters had really undergone a crucible. The easiest one, because the easiest one to explain that you know about, is imagine what happened during the Holocaust in Italy, right? Finally, Italy surrenders, it flip-flops a while. It ends up getting embombed improbably by the Americans and by the Nazis. So it's completely failed in its gambit. But at the end, there is a woman. Now, in my business, I've been writing for a long time. I don't know the ending to the books. People say, do you know how it ends? I go, no, I don't even know how it middles. I think that's not the worst thing. In fact, I think it's a good thing. But at the end of the book, there's a woman, and we've been through hell. Rome has been, oppressed by the fascists, occupied by the Nazis, undergone this upheaval and torment, and we're coming out of the war and liberation. People have been lost. There is a wedding. She is going to stand up, and she's the only one left to give a toast. Those of you who have holiday tables and have lived long enough know that there are people missing at your holiday tables. We know that. And that is uppermost in her mind. Now, the funny thing for me as an author is she hasn't spoken very much in the book. She's a mom. She's either, as she says, I mean, they're either in the kitchen at the restaurant or in the kitchen in the apartment. I never speak. My husband does all the speaking. But she has to give the speech. So she says that by way of apologies. And she says, I'm looking out at this table and I see people I love, but I see empty chairs. I see the people who are missing. So my happiness is bittersweet. And it reminds me of what it's like, she says, every night when I make dinner, I have to put a dinner on the table. I know what I want to make. I don't have, though, all of the ingredients I want. Sometimes I'm missing something. I'm missing basil. I'm missing salt. I'm missing nutmeg. But I make a dinner because I have to. And my question every night when I get my dinner ready is, what can I make with what I have? And I thought, you have to be in the moment when you write a character speech. You have to write from her view. Every woman, and I'm sure any man who cooks knows what it's like to look in the fridge and go, damn, I don't have enough eggs. Now what am I going to make? But I thought it was actually the perfect analogy that would come to a housewife like her, because it's what is a survivor? It is, what do I do with what I have? None of us have escaped hardship. We all have hardship, some worse than others. Probably as bad as it gets is living through the Holocaust. But the Jews who lived through that time every day survived by going, what can I do with what I have? I don't have an analogy for that. Sometimes I think when I look back, when I was channeling her for that speech, I thought of COVID, that early time. And I lost people. We've all had people. My best friend's sick tonight. What can we do with what we have is the question I think women have asked themselves as we glue our families together and put dinner on the table and deal with chemo and sisters who need help and mothers who need help and children who need to get to soccer. And oh my God, there's going to be a storm and it's making landfall when? What can we do with what we have? And to me, finally, it said to me why I got into writing in the first place, which was to celebrate the strength in women and also in men, in everyday people who are undergoing the most impossible tasks that God can hand you and surviving. I don't think any community knows more about that than this community. So I am really honored to speak to you tonight, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have about anything. So thank you very much.
Lisa, you show generosity of heart and great kindness to open up your background and why you wrote the two books. And really, it's been a pleasure. As people hopefully will
Thank you, Reva.
type in their questions, I will just start the ball rolling. What other, you mentioned Holocaust novels. What other novels have you read that you would recommend? Holocaust genre.
Right. You know, I think there's one, it's a hard title. It's called This Way to the Gas Chamber, Ladies and Gentlemen. Tadeusz Borowski, a Polish, and that was another book that Philip Roth really recommended to us. His point was, we know there's a canon of Holocaust literature and it's really important to read it. But he wanted to show us the flanking ones, the ones that maybe wouldn't get the attention. That was one that I thought was just searing. And I would really recommend.
Thank you. Since you have written so many also mystery thrillers, who are your favorite mystery thriller authors?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I know you have thousands of books. I probably do too. This is just my signed collection, which shows you what a geek I am, but I love books and I feel so lucky and so blessed to have a life in them. So I read really widely. As I tell you, I am a single lady, so I sit in a house and either if I'm reading or writing or playing with my dogs. So, there's almost no one I don't read. Harlan Coben, David Baldacci, Louise Penny, Patricia Cornwell. I mean, I could just look behind me because this is the ones I collect. Michael Connolly, one of your
Yes.
Californian, good friend of mine.
I have all his books.
Oh, he's great. Because I think that it's really important. I'm like looking, Lee Child, uh, Alistair Burke. I think it's really important to, I like to joke around. Uh, I take writing very seriously though. And I think that I didn't say, oh, I'm going to write a mystery. I know I'm a president of mystery writers and all that stuff, but I don't think I write mysteries. I think I write novels. And I think you have to approach it with that way. People can put a cover on it. I don't have control over that. So in a way, I like to read people like Connolly because I think he's a terrific writer, whether it's a mystery or not. It's still a character. Bosch is a character you never forget. And I think there's a wonderful historical fiction authors as well. Adriana Trigiani, Kristen Hanna. I mean, there are so many. I have Kate Quinn, Kristen Harmel, Stephanie Dre. I just love reading. I think we live in a really wonderful time where I love that you can consume things in so many ways. For example, I think you mentioned audiobooks. I love audiobooks. And I did a series of humorous memoirs with my daughter. Why My Third Husband Will Be a Dog was one. We won an award for it. But I'm never without an audiobook because I walk the dogs. So I listen. I think the audiobook of Loyalty and of Eternal is sensational. I actually requested that reader, Eduardo Ballerini. But we have so many ways that we can consume now. You can do it in ebooks. You can do it any other way. I'm a book person because I love bookstores and I want bookstores to be in communities. I mean, I'm so glad that, Barnes and Noble is having a resurgence there because I've been to Walnut Creek way back when on book tour. I think bookstores are important for literacy. So I support.
So you mentioned your daughter, and I know she's also an author. What is her name? Because it may not be the same last name.
So
and what
nice.
genre does she write? So we can give them.
We should get, I'm such a bad mom. I don't have it here. She is, my daughter's name is Francesca Saratella. And she wrote a novel called Ghosts of Harvard, which is a really terrific, again, not within a genre, just a terrific novel. It really did well and very well received. It's a psychological mystery and a family story and a love story. It's about a young girl who goes to Harvard in the wake of her brothers who died there by suicide. And he was schizophrenic, and she's going to try to sort all that out. I'm just so proud of her. She's working on her second now.
Okay. Obviously, you've written more fiction than nonfiction. Are
Yes.
you interested in doing another nonfiction?
I think no, because I'm going right now. I just handed in my next thriller, which is called The Truth About the Devlins, and then I'm going to do a historical fiction set in Renaissance Italy, sort of an untold story of of Countess Caterina Sforza. I haven't even announced that yet. So right now, I'm not seeing a nonfiction. I do for people who sign up for my newsletter. I actually write a little funny nonfiction for free. It comes to your inbox every Sunday because I was a columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer for 15 years, but I've just since stopped that. But I still like to joke around in print. So I do.
And people can sign up.
Yeah, it's all
to
free.
your website, which is your last name.
Yes, it's Scottoline.com. And my daughter's name is Francesca Saratella. So I don't have her book.
Let me see what else. Okay. Can you just give us a hint why your third husband would be a dog?
Well, you know what happened? And actually, I got the idea for it when I was in Laguna Niguel. I was speaking at a library, and I have dogs. I'm divorced twice. And I heard people saying I'm divorced 3 times and I have 3 dogs. And I was like, maybe there's a correlation. And it struck me a little bit that our job in this life is to make ourselves, to do good and to make ourselves happy. And not everybody's lucky enough to be married. Maybe you're divorced, maybe you're widowed. But I found myself going, I feel very happy with these little dogs and a cat. Now I have a pony. And you can fill your heart with love and rescue animals like you have, Riva. You're doing good by that. And I've rescued a horse. I mean, so that's a way to live your life. And when I realized that in that library in California, I was like, this is just a room full of women trying to do the best they can with what they have. And isn't that a cause for rejoicing? So that's why.
Well, that is beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to thank you. I don't think there are any more questions, but everyone think about a book group on one or put them together, the two books related to Italy. I think it'd be great for an upcoming book group for 2023, 2024. I want to thank you so much, Lisa, especially your generosity. And Ben, oh, one question more. Have you ever thought, has anyone thought of reaching out to you to make a film?
Actually, I'm having some very nice stuff coming up. My last thriller called What Happened to the Bennetts is going to be on TV. And I've written a series of legal thrillers, probably 17 of them, Rosato and D'Annunzio, and that's going to be on TV as well. So that'll be delightful. I think I'm in terrific hands. So thank you for the question.
Okay, everyone, it's Loyalty and all her other 34 books, plenty to read. And I know someone who reads one book a day, so, but I don't think she's
Wow.
a day. But I can't do that. Maybe 2 books, 3 at the most. But
No, I read one
thank you,
book a day.
everyone. And I want to wish everyone, for those celebrating Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova, have a great 5784, health, peace, and a lot of great books to read. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Thanks again.